On this channel so far, we've explored 1-bit pixel art, 8-bit, and 16-bit. But now let's take a look into high-bit. Now, if you don't know what that is, high-bit pixel art essentially ignores the color limitations of the other bits. For example, a 16-bit sprite uses 15 colors plus 1 for transparency. If you add 1 additional color, it's officially technically high-bit. That's all you had to do. Ta-da, we're done. I'll see you next week. I'm kidding. What I'm gonna do is create a high-bit pixel art poster that pushes the color limits to the absolute brink. And I'm also gonna go over the 6 steps I'm taking so that you can create some high-bit pixel art as well. Let's do it. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Robinson of Robinson Pixels. What I want to do today is design a high-bit poster of Jazz Jackrabbit. The 30th anniversary happens to be this week, so I thought that would be a cool thing to do. All of the levels are grouped together into episodes, and each episode has a little poster image that goes along with it. Now looking at them, they basically just look like art, right? Like they're just drawings. But if you look at the size of them, they're only 134 by 110 pixels. It just doesn't really seem like pixel art necessarily when you're looking at it because there are so many colors involved. So let's make our own high-bit poster, starting with step 1, the base image. To get started, I got a sprite sheet with the episode screens from the Spriters resource, very useful website if you don't know them. I imported that image into Procreate so that I could sketch in extremely rough ideas for what this image might be. I decided the version that I liked had Jazz hanging out with a bunch of birds from the series. The birds in the games are called hip hops, so I thought maybe this could be like Hip Hop Haven or something. In the level editor on Jazz 2, the hip hop is called Chuck. So we're gonna say this one on the left is Chuck. This one on the right will be the blue variant that the community calls Flip. And when I was growing up, my sister would write me Jazz Jackrabbit stories that I would illustrate, and the main hip hop in that series was named Parrot. So we're gonna say this one up on his shoulder is Parrot. Now with the sketch done, I went ahead and inked it. I could have skipped straight into pixels, but I was on a roll. Now the colors still aren't perfect here, I'm gonna mess with those a lot, but we're good enough to go ahead and start pixel time with step 2, outlines and flats. I imported the drawing into Pixaki to use as a reference photo. That's the app that I use for pixel art, but Aseprite will also be able to do everything that we're talking about if that's what you prefer. Now the first step is reducing the opacity of the reference so I can actually see what I'm doing. I then traced my own work using colored outlines like they did in the game. Normally I would outline in black first and then color it later, but I felt like my reference was good enough for me to know what I was doing. And I got nervous that this image was too big and I wasn't actually committing to like pixel art style, so I imported my own sprite on top just to make sure. And yeah, the giraffe is bigger than this whole image. I don't need to be paranoid here about that, but there is a good need to go ahead and plan ahead. So I duplicated that outline layer. And in the lower layer underneath, I started filling in the colors. Now this way, when it comes time to shade later, the outline on top won't be affected. I was thinking ahead. Also, I kept his arm on a separate layer since I figured it would shade a little differently with Parrot on top. Normally I would have gone ahead and colored the entire image with the flats, but I had a new shading technique in mind and I was really excited to see that it would even work. So let's go into the next step. Step 3, the crazy shading plan. If you look at the original episode posters, they all look like they were essentially colored by airbrush. There are a lot of colors involved if you zoom way in, like just one shade of green could have 9 different colors. I'm not gonna go through and pick 9 different shades of green and 9 shades of red, etc. And I don't think that's what they did when they made the game either. They may have used some sort of airbrush technique, I don't know, but we're using pixels. So to pull this off, I made a new layer above the one I wanted to shade. I set that layer's blending mode to multiply, which blends the colors together to darken them. On the layer with the colors, I used the select by color option to select the empty space, and then I inverted that selection. So now I've selected just Jazz himself and I won't accidentally color on the background. Then on the multiply layer, I used dark blue to start shading in the darker areas of the character, keeping in mind that the light source will be from the top left for this particular image. You'll notice it's way too dark, which can be fixed easily by reducing the opacity. Now by using this multiply layer, I'm creating new darker shades for nearly everything here. Green fur, light green fur, red, orange, etc. Now I chose blue instead of black for that multiply layer because in real life when shades get darker they get a little bit bluer. Just go outside sometime at twilight and you'll be able to see that for yourself. Now here's the cool part to make this look airbrushed. I'm really excited about this. I did everything that I just did again. So I made a new multiply layer at low opacity. I colored it again with that same dark blue, overlapping the areas that I wanted even darker. And then I did it again. And again, just stacking the multiply layers over and over. When you do that over and over and over, it looks almost like an airbrush technique. And the other cool thing about it too is you don't have to be super careful with every single pixel the way that you normally would be. You can be a little messy with this and it turns out looking pretty good. Now at this point I had 5 multiply layers, but by the end of it I have 7. I'm just trying to push this thing to the absolute limit. Now also I went ahead and did the same exact technique for the hip hops, so instead of watching all that, let's just speed run it real quick. We've got our characters now, which is actually what I'm the most used to doing as an artist. I've drawn a lot, I've made a lot of pixel art, but all of that usually is just characters. I don't have a whole lot of experience with the next step, the woods. Well, let's not get overwhelmed. Let's just start it with a very far background layer with the little trees back there. Just messy, super light tree shapes. No big deal, just draw them in, they're just lines, right? Just big thick lines, some little bushy parts if you want to do that. We're not adding any details now, and actually because this is the far background, it's not gonna get a lot of details either. Already this whole thing's starting to come to life, including one big stupid mistake I made. I got distracted here and I started working on Jazz, just doing some little revisions, and while doing that I misinterpreted the pinky lines here as part of his palm, so I smoothed it out and I took away his pinky. And I didn't notice that I did that. I'll put it back later, but I just wanted to show you that you can get lost in the pixels if you're staring at them too closely. It's like you can't see the forest through the trees, because the next thing is more trees. This is just another easy tree layer, just some trunks, no details. Over that, I did a layer of shrubs, super simple squiggles that I then bucket filled underneath. Same kind of deal for the grass. I just did some pointy little lines going across the screen, nothing to it. The foreground bush is also just a bunch of planty squiggles. I'll add that you're gonna start seeing the background elements in different colors in almost every shot of the video. Couldn't really decide what I wanted to go with because color values are not my strong point. I'm working on it though. Now from this point, I blocked in everything from the original sketch, but I'm not wild about the way the picture is framed. So first, to try and fix that, I add another tree into the background, but that still doesn't seem like enough. So then I added in a big foreground branch stretching across the front. Yeah, I think that'll do. Sweet, so now it's time for step number 5, the woods improved. This is old hat by now. Add a multiply layer at low opacity and use a blue to darken it. The blue I chose was less saturated than the one I used on the characters. That's because it's in the background, it helps it to look further away. I only used 6 multiply layers here instead of the 7 that I used on the characters, which helps it to look a little less detailed. Again, because it's in the background, you don't want as much detail. Now for the grass, the most important part was making sure I got a shadow under the character's feet. I added a little detail to the mid-level trees, and I'll do some more later, but since they're in the distance, you don't have to worry too much about making realistic bark. But at this point, I thought I'd try something new to liven it up a little, and that is rim lighting. Now, if you don't know what rim lighting is, that's when there's a light source coming behind the character to kind of light up the edges. I created a new layer, but instead of multiply, I used hard light as the blending mode, with a faded bright yellow as my color. At first it was a little too harsh, but it's better once I reduce the opacity some more. I really like how it helps the characters to stand out. Now for the foreground bush and branch, I kept the colors pretty muted, and I set the blending mode to overlay instead of hard light. And that kind of helped to highlight everything without it being too distracting. Now from here, you could call this picture finished, but what if you obsessively want to use every single trick in the book to make it the absolute best thing that you are physically and mentally capable of preparing? Like me. Step 6, the finishing touches. All of the edges of the pixels where it goes from one color to another, they're hard. Which, obviously they're hard because they're squares and you can't really do anything about that. Unless you use the power of anti-aliasing. So what I did is I made a new layer above all the others at 50% opacity. Now starting with the far background trees, I selected the color of the tree, and then I added a single dot where the tree ends and the sky begins. And what that does is it'll automatically create a color between the two, and that helps blend the two together, and that softens the image. I normally only do that when I'm working with like clouds and stuff, but for this, wow, what the hell? I did it on every single thing in the picture, characters included. It was a lot. I also gave Jazz his pinky back. I decided Parrot didn't look happy enough, so I added another layer on top of everything and just completely drew him a new face. I didn't bother with the multiply layers at this point because I had all the colors around me anyway, so I was able to just select those and redraw them in. And redid his pinky again, and that's it! Here is Jazz Jackrabbit in Hip Hop Haven, co-starring Parrot, Chuck, and Flip. It's weird for me to even think that I've made sprites that are larger than this. Like, this thing looks like a whole illustration, but I've made individual pieces like this giraffe that are way bigger. Now, if you want to know the story behind this giraffe, how I made it, and what it means to me, check out the video for that on the side of the screen that it's appearing on right now, wherever that is, and make sure that you follow along for more pixel practice. Those are all. If you look at the